The Beverly Hills Hotel's crystal ballroom sparkled with the kind of glamour only Hollywood could create. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering of entertainment's elite, all dressed in their finest for tonight's Veterans Support Foundation annual gala. The event had drawn the biggest names in the industry, but none commanded quite the same respect as Clint Eastwood. As the legendary actor and director made his way through the grand entrance, heads turned not because of any flashy display, but because of the quiet dignity he carried with him. His tailored black suit was impeccable, his silver hair neatly combed, but it was what was on his feet that told the real story. A pair of well-worn cowboy boots that had clearly seen decades of use. These weren't just any boots. The leather was cracked and creased, telling tales of countless movie sets, long days of directing, and years of charitable work. The soles were worn smooth in places, marking every step of a journey that had taken him from a young actor in TV westerns to one of Hollywood's most respected figures. Some of the younger guests whispered among themselves, wondering why someone of Eastwood's stature would wear such weathered footwear to such a prestigious event. But the veterans in attendance, the very people this gala was meant to support, nodded in quiet appreciation. They recognized something in those boots that the others missed: authenticity. The boots had been with him through the filming of Unforgiven, walked the dusty paths of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and stood firm during the countless hours he spent directing masterpieces like $1 Million Baby. But more importantly, they'd carried him through decades of quiet, charitable work that never made the headlines. As Eastwood made his way through the crowd, people parted respectfully. He stopped occasionally to shake hands with old friends and colleagues, each greeting genuine and warm. There was no pretense about him, no air of superiority despite his legendary status. His boots clicked softly against the polished marble floor, a sound that somehow seemed to ground the entire glittering affair in something real. The ballroom was filled with the usual trappings of high society gatherings: ice sculptures depicting scenes of military valor, tables adorned with elaborate flower arrangements, and waiters carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. But Eastwood's presence, particularly those well-worn boots, served as a reminder that true class had nothing to do with the price tag of what you wore. Several young actors approached him, eager to share their admiration, and perhaps gain some wisdom from the veteran filmmaker. Eastwood greeted each one with the same genuine interest, regardless of their status in the industry. His boots shifted slightly as he stood, the leather creasing in familiar places, comfortable and well-used like an old friend. The evening was just beginning, and already the room was buzzing with energy. Photographers discreetly captured moments, their flashes adding to the sparkle of the crystal chandeliers. The boots stood out in these photos, a stark contrast to the sea of perfectly polished designer shoes surrounding them. But those boots represented something that no amount of money could buy: years of dedication, hard work, and unwavering principles. They were more than just footwear. They were a statement about staying true to oneself in an industry known for its superficiality. As the gala's opening ceremonies approached, no one could have predicted how these humble boots would become the center of a lesson that would leave everyone in attendance speechless. Among the sea of familiar Hollywood faces, one stood out like a peacock among pigeons. Marcus Sterling, the 35-year-old founder of Sterling Tech Solutions, made his entrance with the kind of calculated showmanship that had become his trademark in Silicon Valley. His custom-made Italian suit, rumored to cost more than most people's cars, caught the light with each movement, its subtle metallic threads creating an almost ethereal effect. Marcus wasn't just any tech billionaire. He was the newest, youngest, and perhaps the most eager to prove himself among the entertainment elite. His company's revolutionary AI software had recently made headlines by revolutionizing film production, making him an overnight sensation in Hollywood circles. But tonight marked his first major industry event, and his determination to make an impression was evident in every detail of his appearance. His shoes, handcrafted by a boutique Italian designer, gleamed with the kind of perfection that suggested they'd never touched anything less pristine than red carpet. Each step he took was deliberate, calculated, as if he were constantly aware of being watched. The whispers followed him through the room, some impressed by his meteoric rise to wealth, others skeptical of this newcomer to their closely guarded world. Marcus moved through the crowd with practiced charm, his smile never wavering as he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries. He'd spent weeks memorizing faces and facts about key industry players, determined to prove he belonged in these rarefied circles. His personal assistant trailed a few steps behind, carrying a leather portfolio containing details about every significant person in attendance. The young billionaire's eyes constantly scanned the room, measuring his success by the caliber of people he managed to engage. Each conversation was a carefully orchestrated performance, with Marcus dropping subtle hints about his wealth and influence, while maintaining an air of false modesty. His laugh, too loud and too eager, betrayed his nervousness to the more perceptive observers. Between networking attempts, Marcus would check his reflection in any available surface: the shine of a champagne glass, the metallic walls of the elevator, the darkened windows. Each time, he'd adjust his platinum cufflinks or smooth his meticulously styled hair, ensuring every detail of his carefully crafted image remained perfect. What set Marcus apart wasn't just his age or his wealth, it was his almost desperate need to be accepted by this crowd. In Silicon Valley, his money alone commanded respect. But here, in Hollywood, where legends were made of sterner stuff than stock options and market valuations, he felt like an outsider trying to buy his way in. His conversation topics inevitably circled back to his own achievements: how he built his company from scratch, how he revolutionized the tech industry, how his latest innovations were changing the entertainment world. Each story was polished to perfection, like everything else about him, but lacked the authenticity that characterized the true legends in the room. As the evening progressed, Marcus's confidence grew with each glass of champagne. He began to believe his own carefully constructed narrative, his voice growing louder, his gestures more expansive. The young billionaire was so focused on making his mark that he failed to notice how some of the industry veterans quietly distanced themselves from his increasingly theatrical displays of wealth and status. The tech tycoon's entire demeanor spoke of someone who believed that everything, respect, acceptance, admiration, could be bought for the right price. His designer watch, his bespoke suit, his limited edition shoes were all chosen not just for their quality, but for their power to impress. Yet in a room full of people who had earned their status through decades of work and talent, his attempts at buying belonging only served to highlight the difference between genuine prestige and purchased privilege. Little did Marcus know that his carefully constructed world of appearances was about to collide with a reality check in the form of a pair of worn cowboy boots. As he continued his circuit of the room, his eyes fell upon the legendary Clint Eastwood, and a smile spread across his face. Here, finally, was his chance to make the kind of impression that would cement his place in Hollywood society. But that smile held a hint of something else, something that would soon lead to a moment that would change his perspective forever. Marcus's eyes lit up with recognition as he spotted Clint Eastwood across the ballroom. Here was his chance. A photo with the legend himself would be worth its weight in social media gold. He adjusted his tie one final time, practiced his most winning smile, and began making his way through the crowd with the determined precision of a heat-seeking missile. The closer he got to Eastwood, the more his confidence grew. Marcus had rehearsed this moment countless times in his head, imagining how he'd impress the Hollywood icon with his achievements and charm. But as he drew near, something caught his eye that made him pause mid-stride. Those boots. Those old, worn, decidedly unglamorous cowboy boots. Marcus couldn't help but stare at them, his carefully prepared opening lines momentarily forgotten. The contrast between Eastwood's footwear and the rest of the room's designer shoes was stark, almost jarring to the tech billionaire's carefully curated sensibilities. In his world, image was everything, and those boots seemed to defy every rule of high society presentation. Still, he pressed forward, extending his hand with practiced precision. "Mr. Eastwood," Marcus announced, his voice carrying just loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "I'm Marcus Sterling of Sterling Tech Solutions. I must say it's an absolute honor to meet you." His smile was perfect, rehearsed to the exact degree of warmth and respect his PR team had advised. Eastwood turned to face him, his weathered features settling into a polite but reserved expression. He shook Marcus's hand with a firm grip that spoke of decades of genuine handshakes, not the calculated networking touches Marcus was used to. "Evening," Eastwood replied simply, his voice carrying the gravelly warmth that had become his trademark. Marcus's eyes couldn't help but drift downward again to those boots. They seemed to mock everything he stood for, the carefully maintained image, the pursuit of perfection, the belief that status had to be displayed to be real. He found himself shifting his own feet, as if to draw attention to his own immaculate footwear. The young billionaire began his prepared speech about his company's contributions to the film industry, but his usual smooth delivery was interrupted by occasional glances at those boots. Each look made him more uncertain, more thrown off his game. Here was Clint Eastwood, a living legend, wearing footwear that wouldn't make it past the door at any of Marcus's exclusive Silicon Valley clubs. Other guests had begun to gather around them, drawn by the peculiar energy of the interaction. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, and it only intensified his focus on the disparity between his own carefully crafted appearance and Eastwood's comfortable authenticity. The tech billionaire's natural instinct to control the situation, to maintain his carefully constructed image, began to wrestle with his growing discomfort. "I have to say," Marcus continued, his voice taking on a slightly condescending tone that he usually reserved for startup pitches he was about to reject, "I'm surprised to see such practical footwear at an event like this. Though I suppose they must have sentimental value." He tried to frame it as a question, but the underlying judgment was clear to everyone within earshot. The surrounding conversations began to quiet, as more people turned their attention to the interaction between the young tech mogul and the Hollywood legend. Marcus, misreading the growing tension as interest, felt emboldened. His carefully constructed facade of respect began to crack, revealing the arrogance that lay beneath. The boots seemed to become more prominent with each passing second, like a challenge to everything Marcus believed about success and status. They represented an approach to life that was completely foreign to his understanding, one where authenticity trumped appearance, where substance mattered more than style. As the silence grew, Marcus found himself unable to stop staring at those boots, his mind racing with calculations about their age, their worth, their appropriateness for such an occasion. He didn't notice the knowing looks exchanged between the veteran Hollywood figures around him, nor did he sense the shift in the room's atmosphere. He was too focused on the anomaly before him, a man who seemed to defy everything Marcus thought he knew about power and presence in high society. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake Marcus's perfectly ordered world to its foundations, though he didn't know it yet. His next words would trigger a response that would leave not just him, but everyone in attendance completely speechless. Marcus's growing discomfort with Eastwood's boots finally bubbled over into an outright display of condescension. With a laugh that was too loud and too forced, he gestured toward the legendary actor's feet. "You know, Mr. Eastwood, I could easily help you upgrade your footwear situation. I know an excellent boutique in Milan that could craft you something more suitable for occasions like this. My treat, of course." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath. Several guests who had been pretending not to listen suddenly stopped their conversations entirely. The soft clink of champagne glasses fell silent, and even the waiters paused in their circuits around the room, sensing the gravity of the moment. "I mean, these boots have clearly served their purpose," Marcus continued, either oblivious to or emboldened by the growing tension. "But surely someone of your stature should be wearing something that better reflects your position in Hollywood. These look like they've been through a war." He chuckled at his own joke, expecting others to join in. No one did. Undeterred by the silence, Marcus pressed on, his voice carrying across the now quiet ballroom. "I imagine they were great for those Western films back in the day, but times have changed. My shoes here?" He lifted his foot slightly, drawing attention to his own gleaming Italian leather. "Handcrafted by artisans who only make 12 pairs a year. Now, that's what I call making a statement." A veteran actress nearby placed her hand over her mouth in shock. A well-known director shook his head slowly, and a prominent producer took a step back, as if to distance himself from the impending disaster. But Marcus, riding high on his own perceived superiority, missed all these warning signs. "Just look at them," he continued, his voice taking on an almost theatrical quality as he addressed the growing crowd. "The leather's cracked. The soles are worn. They're practically falling apart. I mean, we're at the Beverly Hills Hotel, not a ranch in Texas." He looked around, still searching for approval that wasn't coming. The silence in the room had become deafening. Even the background music seemed to have faded away, as if the sound system itself was holding its breath. Marcus's words hung in the air like heavy smoke, impossible to take back or ignore. "I've got my assistant right here," Marcus pressed on, gesturing to the uncomfortable-looking young man hovering nearby with the leather portfolio. "We could have new boots ordered and delivered before your next public appearance. Top-grade leather, hand-stitched, custom-fitted, the works. Consider it my contribution to maintaining Hollywood's standards of excellence." A few gasps could be heard from the crowd. Someone whispered, "Does he have any idea what those boots mean?" Another murmured, "He's about to learn a very expensive lesson." But Marcus, caught up in his own performance, remained oblivious to the reactions around him. "I mean, when people look at you, they should see success, sophistication, elegance, not old leather that's seen better days. These boots, they're just so ordinary. And let's be honest, in our position, we can't afford to be ordinary, can we?" Marcus's voice had taken on an almost patronizing tone, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. The tech billionaire even went so far as to pull out his phone, ready to make a call. "I can have my personal shopper on the line right now. He's got connections with every luxury bootmaker in Europe. We could have something spectacular crafted for you, something worthy of your legacy." Each word seemed to dig Marcus's hole deeper, and the growing crowd watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Some had their phones out, sensing that they were about to witness something memorable. Others simply stood in stunned silence, waiting for the inevitable response from Eastwood. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Marcus stood there, phone in hand, a smile plastered across his face that was beginning to show the first signs of uncertainty. He had finally run out of words, and in the silence that followed, the weight of his social miscalculation began to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. The stage was set for Eastwood's response, and everyone knew that whatever came next would be a moment they'd never forget. The silence that followed Marcus's outburst was so complete you could hear the ice settling in abandoned cocktail glasses. Clint Eastwood hadn't moved, hadn't changed his expression, hadn't given any indication that he'd even heard the tech billionaire's extended mockery of his boots. But something in the atmosphere had shifted, like the stillness before a storm. Marcus's confident smile began to waver at the edges as the silence stretched on. His phone, still held aloft with his shopper's number ready to dial, started to feel heavy in his hand. The weight of everyone's stares pressed in on him from all sides, and for the first time that evening, a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. Several veteran actors who had worked with Eastwood over the decades exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen that stillness before, on film sets, in interviews, in tough negotiations. It was the calm that preceded some of the most memorable moments in cinema history. One older director actually took a step back, as if to get a better view of what was about to unfold. The young billionaire's assistant, sensing the shifting dynamics, quietly tried to fade into the background. A waiter who had been approaching with a tray of champagne made a swift about-face, not wanting to interrupt what was clearly becoming a pivotal moment. The photographer who had been documenting the evening lowered his camera, unwilling to break the spell with even the soft click of a shutter. Marcus's hand holding the phone began to tremble slightly. He looked around the room, seeking any friendly face, any ally in the crowd, but found only stern expressions and disapproving glances. The silence had become a living thing, growing and expanding until it filled every corner of the vast ballroom. Time seemed to slow down. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast long shadows across the marble floor, and in those shadows, Marcus's perfectly polished shoes suddenly seemed gaudy and out of place. Each second that ticked by stripped away another layer of his carefully constructed confidence. A few of the veterans in attendance, the ones the gala was meant to honor, stood with small smiles playing at the corners of their mouths. They recognized something in Eastwood's stance, in his measured silence, that spoke volumes about character and respect. To them, those worn boots carried more honor than any overpriced Italian leather ever could. Marcus's throat went dry. He tried to swallow but couldn't. His collar, perfectly comfortable just moments ago, now felt too tight. The room seemed to be getting warmer, and the weight of expectation pressed down on him like a physical force. He opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps try to laugh it off or make a joke, but no words came out. The legend's weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes, those eyes that had stared down countless adversaries on the silver screen, held Marcus's gaze with an intensity that made the young billionaire want to look away. But he couldn't. He was trapped, caught in the gravitational pull of this moment he had created. Someone coughed softly in the background, and the sound made Marcus jump slightly. His phone slipped in his sweaty palm, and he fumbled to catch it, the movement seeming absurdly loud in the silent room. A few people winced at the disruption, but most kept their eyes fixed on Eastwood, waiting. The contrast between the two men had never been more stark. Marcus, with every detail of his appearance carefully chosen to project wealth and status, now seeming somehow smaller despite his expensive suit and shining shoes, and Eastwood, in his well-worn boots, radiating a quiet dignity that no amount of money could buy. The tension continued to build as the silence stretched on. Marcus's carefully constructed world of appearances and superficial impressions was crumbling around him, and he could feel it happening, but was powerless to stop it. Each passing second felt like an eternity, and the weight of his own words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Those boots, which had seemed so worthy of mockery just moments ago, now seemed to hold a power all their own. They stood firm on the polished floor, grounded in decades of history that Marcus was only beginning to understand he knew nothing about. The stage was set for a response that would change not just the evening, but the young billionaire's entire worldview. Finally, Clint Eastwood shifted his weight slightly, the old leather of his boots creaking softly in the silence. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried effortlessly across the hushed room, each word measured and deliberate. "You know, young man," he began, his gravelly tone tinged with something that wasn't quite anger, but carried the weight of decades of experience. "These boots have walked paths you couldn't imagine. They've carried me through 60 years of not just film history, but life itself." He glanced down at the worn leather, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "When I first bought them, I was nobody special. Just another actor trying to make it in a tough business. They cost me a week's salary back then, but they were worth every penny because they were honest boots, made for work, not for show." The room remained absolutely still as he continued, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. "These boots stood with me through the heat of the Spanish desert while filming the good, the bad, and the ugly. They've walked through the dust of countless Western sets, not as a costume piece, but as a part of who I am." Marcus's phone had disappeared into his pocket, forgotten. His face, previously flushed with alcohol and bravado, had drained of color as Eastwood spoke. "But you see, their real value isn't in what they've done in front of the camera. These boots have walked through hospitals where veterans struggle to rebuild their lives. They've stood on construction sites where we're building homes for families who've lost everything. They've carried me through long days of directing, where the only thing that matters is getting the story right, not looking good for the cameras." Eastwood's eyes, sharp and clear, fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made the younger man take an involuntary step backward. "You talk about making statements with what you wear. Well, these boots make a statement too. They say that I'm still the same person I was before fame, before fortune, before all of this." He gestured to the opulent ballroom around them. "They've been resolved 4 times, not because I can't afford new ones, but because some things in life are worth keeping, worth maintaining, worth respecting. These boots remind me every day that true worth isn't in what something costs, but in what it's lived through." A veteran in the crowd nodded silently, understanding etched deep in his features. Others stood transfixed as Eastwood continued, his words carrying a weight that no amount of money could buy. "You see those scuffs there?" He pointed to a particularly worn spot on the left boot. "Got those while helping build a rehabilitation center for wounded warriors. And these creases? They're from kneeling beside a young actor who was struggling with his first big role, teaching him that confidence comes from within, not from what you wear or what you own." His voice took on a harder edge, though it never rose above its quiet intensity. "You offer to buy me new boots as if that would somehow improve who I am. As if the shine on your shoes or the name on your suit makes you more worthy of respect. But let me tell you something about respect, son. It's earned through actions, not accessories." The silence in the room had taken on a different quality now, filled with the kind of attention that comes when truth is being spoken without adornment or pretense. These boots have carried me through moments of triumph and tragedy. They've walked red carpets and dirt roads. They've stood beside people in their finest hours and their darkest moments. And every scuff, every crack, every worn spot tells a story of a life lived in service to something bigger than myself. Eastwood's final words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would continue long after the evening ended. So before you judge someone by what they're wearing, consider that the most valuable things in life often carry the marks of the journey that made them worthwhile. The tech billionaire stood frozen, his own expensive shoes suddenly seeming to burn with shame against the polished floor. The lesson wasn't just about boots anymore. It was about the difference between appearing successful and truly being valuable to the world. "Let me tell you about these boots," Eastwood continued, his voice taking on a more reflective tone. "Back in 1959, when I was just starting out on rawhide, I bought them from an old bootmaker in Arizona. He spent 3 days making them by hand, teaching me about leather and craftsmanship while I waited. These boots, he told me, will last as long as you remember what they stand for." The crowd had drawn closer, drawn in by the intimate nature of his storytelling. Even the wait staff had stopped to listen, trays held forgotten at their sides. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "In 1971, I wore these boots while directing my first film, Play Misty for Me. I was nervous as hell that first day, but these boots kept me grounded. They reminded me of where I came from, of all the directors I'd worked with who taught me that leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about earning trust." Eastwood paused, looking down at the worn leather. "In 1992, during the filming of Unforgiven, I wore these same boots. They'd already been resold twice by then. One of the younger actors asked me why I didn't get new ones. I told him, 'Son, sometimes the oldest tools are the most reliable.'" His voice grew softer, more contemplative. "But the real stories, the ones that matter most, aren't from the movie sets. These boots were there in '87 when we broke ground on the first Veterans Rehabilitation Center I helped fund. I spent that whole day working alongside the construction crew, my fancy suit hanging in a trailer while these boots got covered in mud and concrete." A veteran in the crowd cleared his throat emotionally, recognizing the center Eastwood was talking about. The actor acknowledged him with a slight nod before continuing. "They were there in 2005 when I walked through the ruins after Hurricane Katrina, meeting with families who'd lost everything. These boots carried me through flooded streets while we worked to help rebuild homes and lives. The water damage took months to repair, but I wouldn't replace them. They'd earned their scars, just like the people we were helping." Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his own pristine shoes now seeming to mock him with their unblemished surface. "In 2008, I wore them to visit troops in military hospitals. One young soldier, both legs lost to an IED, noticed them. 'Those boots have seen some miles, sir,' he said. I took them off right there and let him hold them. He ran his fingers over every crack and crease, and I saw in his eyes that he understood. Every mark told a story of survival." The room was completely still now, hanging on every word. Even the ambient sounds of the hotel seemed to have faded away. "These boots walked me through the funerals of dear friends, actors, crew members, veterans I'd come to know over the years. They've stood silent vigil as we laid to rest some of the finest people I've ever known. And they've danced at weddings, celebrations, and ceremonies, where we honored those who served their country." Eastwood's eyes swept the room, meeting the gazes of the veterans present. "Last year I wore these boots while helping to inaugurate a new wing at the Veterans Center. A young woman came up to me. Turned out she was the daughter of that soldier who'd held my boots years ago. She told me her father had passed away, but he'd never forgotten that moment. She said it taught her that true character shows in the wear and tear of life, not in the shine of new things." His voice carried a gentle but firm authority as he continued. "These boots have been with me through Oscar ceremonies and simple backyard barbecues. They've walked red carpets and hospital corridors. They've carried me through triumph and tragedy, through celebrations and sorrows. Each scuff, each crack, each worn spot represents a moment lived, a lesson learned, a life touched. The silence in the room was profound, filled with understanding and respect. Marcus's earlier mockery now seemed not just shallow, but almost sacrilegious in the face of such rich history. "So you see," Eastwood concluded, his eyes finding Marcus's once again, "these aren't just old boots that need replacing. They're a testament to a life lived in service of something greater than personal comfort or appearance. They've earned every mark, every crack, every sign of wear, and as long as I can stand in them, they'll continue to carry me wherever I'm needed." The tech billionaire's offer of new boots now hung in the air like a childhood mistake, embarrassing in its naivety and lack of understanding. The room waited to see how this lesson in humility and authentic value would continue to unfold. Eastwood shifted his stance, his boots moving slightly on the polished floor, and addressed the room at large rather than just Marcus. His voice carried the same gravelly warmth but now held a tone of universal wisdom rather than personal history. "You know, in all my years in Hollywood, I've learned that the most valuable things can't be bought," he began. "They're earned through time, through dedication, through staying true to who you are, even when it would be easier to change." He gestured to the gathered crowd, taking in the mix of veterans, celebrities, and industry professionals. "Look around this room. Every person here has their own story, their own journey. Some wear designer suits, others wear medals of honor. But what matters isn't what they're wearing. It's what they've done with their lives." Marcus found himself nodding unconsciously, his earlier bravado completely dissolved in the face of such authentic wisdom. The phone in his pocket, with its list of luxury retailers, felt suddenly childish and meaningless. "Success," Eastwood continued, "real success isn't measured by what you can buy. It's measured by what you give back. These boots have walked me through more charity events, veterans hospitals, and community service projects than I can count. Each scuff mark represents a moment where I chose to do something that mattered." A veteran in a wheelchair near the front of the crowd spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "Sir, I was at one of those hospitals when you visited. You spent hours talking to each of us, treating us like people, not photo opportunities." Eastwood acknowledged him with a respectful nod. "Because that's what really matters. Not the photos, not the publicity, but the actual human connections we make, the lives we touch, the differences we make when no one's watching and there's no praise to be gained." He turned back to Marcus, but his words were clearly meant for everyone. "You see, young man, these boots represent a choice I made early in my career. A choice to value substance over style, actions over appearances, and character over costly accessories." The tech billionaire's face had transformed from embarrassment to genuine understanding. The lesson was sinking in, reaching past his carefully constructed facade to touch something real beneath. "Every morning when I put these boots on," Eastwood continued, "they remind me of all the paths I've walked, all the people I've met, all the lives I've been privileged to be part of. They remind me that true worth isn't in what you wear or what you own. It's in what you do for others." He paused, looking down at the worn leather. "These boots have taught me more about life than any success seminar or business book ever could. They've taught me that durability matters more than fashion, that comfort comes from authenticity, not luxury, and that the most valuable things in life often look the least impressive to those who don't understand their worth." The room had grown still again, but this time with a different quality. Not the tense silence of before, but the quiet of deep reflection. Even the youngest, most image-conscious guests were looking thoughtfully at their own expensive footwear. "In this industry," Eastwood went on, "it's easy to get caught up in appearances, to think that your worth is measured by the brand names you wear or the car you drive. But at the end of the day, none of that matters. What matters is what you've done with your opportunities, how you've helped others, what legacy you're leaving behind." He gestured to his boots one final time. "These boots remind me every day that the most valuable things in life aren't things at all. They're experiences, relationships, moments of helping others, chances to make a difference. Every scuff and crack in this leather represents one of those moments, and I wouldn't trade them for all the new boots in Italy." The message hung in the air, profound in its simplicity. Marcus's earlier offer of new boots now seemed not just inappropriate, but almost comically missing the point. The tech billionaire's own expensive shoes, despite their perfect shine and prestigious brand name, suddenly seemed empty of meaning. So before you judge someone's worth by what they're wearing, Eastwood concluded, remember that the most valuable things in life often bear the marks of the journey that made them worthwhile. And sometimes, just sometimes, a pair of old boots can teach us more about success than all the luxury brands in the world. The lesson wasn't just about footwear anymore, it was about values, about authenticity, about the difference between appearing successful and truly making a difference in the world. And as the words settled over the crowd, it was clear that this moment would stay with them long after the gala ended. Marcus Sterling stood completely still, his designer suit suddenly feeling like a costume rather than clothing. The transformation happening within him was visible to everyone in the room, like watching a mask slowly crack and fall away, revealing the genuine person beneath. His hands, which had so confidently held his phone just minutes ago, now hung limply at his sides. The tech billionaire's face, usually set in an expression of calculated charm, now showed raw emotion, humility, understanding, and a deep sense of shame at his earlier behavior. He began, his voice barely above a whisper, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, Marcus Sterling was at a complete loss for words. The carefully crafted speeches, the practiced charm, the rehearsed business anecdotes, none of them seemed appropriate now. The crowd watched as he struggled internally, witnessing the rare sight of a man's entire worldview shifting in real time. A few of the older guests nodded slightly, recognizing the moment for what it was, not just embarrassment but genuine transformation. Marcus's eyes moved slowly from Eastwood's face to those famous boots, but this time he saw them differently. Every scuff and crack now told a story he could almost see, tales of service, of humanity, of real accomplishment rather than purchased prestige. He reached down unconsciously to touch his own pristine shoes, their immaculate surface suddenly seeming shallow and meaningless. These shoes that had cost more than some people's monthly salary had no stories to tell, no lives touched, no service rendered. "I've been measuring everything wrong," he finally said, his voice carrying the raw edge of revelation. All of it. Success, worth, respect. Everything. The words weren't practiced or polished. They emerged rough and real, like uncut diamonds. The tech billionaire looked around the room, seeing it with new eyes. The veterans in their worn uniforms, the actors and directors who'd worked their way up from nothing, the charitable foundation workers in their modest attire. They all carried something his expensive wardrobe couldn't buy. Authenticity. "My whole life," he continued, speaking more to himself than the crowd, "I've been trying to buy respect. Every upgrade, every luxury purchase, every exclusive item, I thought they were making me more successful, more worthy. But they were just things. Empty things." Eastwood remained silent, allowing the young man's epiphany to unfold naturally. The legend's weathered face showed neither judgment nor satisfaction, just patient understanding. "I have a closet full of shoes that cost more than cars," Marcus admitted, a bitter laugh escaping him. "But not one of them has ever walked me to help someone in need. I have suits from every luxury brand in Europe, but I've never worn them to build anything lasting, anything that matters." The transformation was evident in his posture, his voice, his entire demeanor. The polished veneer of the tech tycoon was falling away, revealing something more genuine underneath, something that had perhaps been buried since his early days of success. "All these years," he continued, his voice growing stronger with realization, "I've been confusing price with value. I've been so focused on looking successful that I forgot to actually be useful." He turned to face Eastwood directly, his eyes clear and focused for perhaps the first time that evening. The silence in the room was supportive now, almost nurturing, as everyone witnessed this moment of profound change. Several of the veterans exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen transformations like this before, usually in young soldiers who just learned their first hard lessons about what really matters in life. Marcus's assistant, still hovering nearby, quietly closed the leather portfolio containing all the carefully researched networking information. Somehow, he sensed his boss wouldn't be needing it anymore. The algorithms I've developed, the technology my company creates, they could be doing so much more, Marcus said, his entrepreneur's mind already beginning to work in new directions. We could be helping veterans, supporting communities, making a real difference instead of just chasing the next billion. His transformation wasn't complete. Such fundamental changes never happen in a single moment. But the seed had been planted, the first crack had appeared in his materialistic worldview, and through that crack, a new understanding was beginning to grow. The tech billionaire stood straighter, no longer performing but simply being. The weight of maintaining his carefully crafted image had lifted, replaced by something lighter but more substantial, the beginning of authentic purpose. Those who witnessed this transformation would later say that they'd never seen anything quite like it. A man's entire value system dismantled and rebuilt in the space of a few minutes, sparked by a simple pair of worn boots and the wisdom they represented. Marcus took a deep breath, and for the first time that evening, he spoke without calculation or pretense. "Mr. Eastwood, I owe you an apology, not just for my ignorant comments about your boots, but for everything they represent, my whole misguided way of thinking." His voice carried a sincerity that surprised even him. Gone was the practiced charm of the tech mogul, replaced by genuine humility. "I've spent years building a company worth billions, but I'm just now realizing I've barely built anything of real value." Eastwood watched the young man with quiet attention, seeing the authenticity in his transformation. Around them, the crowd remained respectfully silent, witnessing what had become a deeply personal moment. "Those boots," Marcus continued, gesturing to Eastwood's well-worn footwear, "they've probably done more good in one day than I've done in my entire career. I've been so focused on accumulating wealth, on showing off success, that I forgot what success really means." He turned to address the veterans in the crowd, his eyes meeting theirs directly. "Your service, your sacrifice, that's real value. And while I've been collecting status symbols, you've been rebuilding lives, supporting each other, making a genuine difference." One of the older veterans nodded encouragingly, recognizing the genuine nature of Marcus's revelation. The tech billionaire continued, his words coming from a place of newfound understanding. "Mr. Eastwood, I'd like to learn more about your foundation's work with veterans, not as a photo opportunity or a tax write-off, but as someone who wants to understand how technology could actually help make a difference in people's lives." His assistant, sensing the shift in his boss, had already pulled out a notepad, not to record networking contacts, but to take notes on potential ways to help. "My company has resources, capabilities that could be useful. We've been using our AI technology to make movies more profitable, but maybe it could help veterans find employment or assist rehabilitation centers in providing better care." Eastwood's expression softened slightly, recognizing the genuine change in the young man's approach. Marcus continued, his entrepreneur's mind now working in a completely new direction. "The facial recognition software we developed for entertainment. It could be adapted to help veterans with PTSD recognize trigger situations. Our virtual reality systems could be used for physical therapy. There's so much potential we've been wasting on trivial applications." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, mussing it slightly but not caring any more about maintaining his immaculate appearance. "I've been measuring success by the wrong metrics entirely. Downloads, user engagement, market capitalization. None of it matters if we're not actually helping people." Marcus turned back to Eastwood, his voice steady and sincere. "I know I can't undo my earlier behavior, but I'd like to learn from it. Would you be willing to show me what real service looks like? Not as a publicity stunt, but as someone who genuinely wants to understand and help." The room waited for Eastwood's response, the silence heavy with anticipation. The tech billionaire stood there, no longer the polished showman, but simply a man asking for guidance. "My schedule is clear for the next month," Marcus added. "I'd like to visit your foundation, meet the people you work with, understand their needs. No cameras, no press releases, just honest learning about how we can make a real difference." His assistant looked startled at this announcement, knowing the dozens of high-profile meetings and events that would need to be rescheduled, but Marcus didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt like he was about to do something truly meaningful. And these shoes? He glanced down at his own expensive footwear with a slight smile. I think it's time they earned some real stories of their own. Maybe they can start by walking through a construction site or a rehabilitation center, actually doing something worthwhile instead of just looking impressive. The transformation in Marcus was palpable, from a man obsessed with appearances to someone beginning to understand the true meaning of value and success. His apology wasn't just words, it was the start of a genuine commitment to change. The evening had become more than just another charity gala. It had become a moment of profound personal transformation, sparked by a pair of worn boots and the wisdom they represented. And as Marcus stood there waiting for Eastwood's response, everyone present knew they were witnessing the beginning of something significant. 1 month after the gala, Marcus Sterling's transformation was more than just words. It had become action. His Italian leather shoes, once pristine symbols of status, now bore the honest marks of service. The scuffs and scratches told stories of construction sites, veteran centers, and long days spent understanding the real needs of those he wanted to help. Sterling Tech Solutions had undergone its own transformation. The company's main lobby, once a showcase of modern luxury, now displayed photos of veterans and their families. But these weren't the usual corporate PR shots. They were genuine moments captured during Marcus's hands-on involvement in various community projects. The algorithm team that used to optimize social media engagement? They're now developing AI systems to match veterans with employment opportunities, Marcus explained to a group of visitors, his voice carrying the enthusiasm of genuine purpose. We've already helped place over 200 veterans in jobs that actually utilize their skills. His assistant, who had once maintained a calendar full of exclusive networking events, now coordinated volunteer schedules and project timelines. The leather portfolio that once held competitor analyses now contained progress reports on community initiatives and veteran support programs. The VR technology we were using for entertainment, it's being adapted for physical therapy, Marcus continued, leading the group through the company's research lab. We're working directly with rehabilitation specialists to ensure it actually meets their needs, not just what we think they need. The change wasn't just in the company's project, it was visible in Marcus himself. His suits were still well made, but no longer chosen to impress. His shoes, though polished, showed signs of real work. Most notably, his eyes had lost their calculating gleam, replaced by genuine warmth. Eastwood's boots taught me something I'll never forget, he shared with his team during a project meeting. Success isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you contribute. Every mark on those boots represented a life touched, a difference made. That's the kind of legacy we should be building. The company's board of directors had initially been skeptical of the new direction, but the results were undeniable. Employee satisfaction had skyrocketed. Talent retention improved as people found meaning in their work, beyond just collecting a paycheck. Even the company's stock price had risen, as investors recognized the value of genuine social impact. We're not just writing checks anymore, Marcus explained to a group of veteran service organizations. We're investing time, expertise, and technology in ways that actually make a difference. Every project has to answer one question. Are we genuinely helping people? The transformation extended beyond the company. Marcus had become a regular volunteer at various veteran centers, often spending weekends working alongside those he aimed to help. His expensive shoes had earned their first scuffs building wheelchair ramps, and he wore those marks with more pride than he'd ever felt in their original pristine state. You know what I realized? He shared with a young veteran during a coding workshop. All those years I was trying to buy respect through expensive things. But real respect comes from what you do, not what you own. These scuffed shoes have earned more genuine respect than all my designer pairs combined. The tech billionaire's social media, once a carefully curated display of luxury and success, now showcased real moments of community service and veteran support. There were no professional photographers, no PR teams, just honest documentation of actual work being done. His relationship with Eastwood had evolved too. What began as a humbling lesson had grown into a genuine mentorship, with the Hollywood legend guiding Marcus in understanding true service and authentic leadership. Those boots of his, Marcus reflected during a foundation meeting, they're not just footwear, they're a philosophy. Every day I try to make sure my own shoes earn their wear through meaningful work, not just showing off. The change in Marcus Sterling had become a catalyst for broader transformation in the tech industry. Other companies began to recognize that true innovation wasn't just about profit, it was about purpose. The billionaire who once mocked a pair of worn boots had become an advocate for authentic service and meaningful impact. Success, he often said now, isn't measured by how much you can buy. It's measured by how much you can give, how many lives you can touch, how much genuine good you can do. Everything else is just for show. The worn boots that had once seemed so out of place at a luxury gala had sparked a revolution of values, reminding everyone that true worth isn't in the shine of new things, but in the honest marks of service and purpose. 1 year after that fateful evening at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the story of the boots and the billionaire had become something of a legend in both Hollywood and Silicon Valley. But unlike most legends, this one continued to create real, tangible change in the world. The Veterans Support Foundation's annual gala had returned to the same ballroom, but this time something was different. The attendees' focus wasn't on designer labels or luxury brands. Instead, there was an authentic atmosphere of purpose and service that filled the room. Marcus Sterling stood at the podium, his once pristine shoes now bearing the honest marks of a year's worth of service. "A year ago, I stood in this very room and made the biggest mistake of my life," he began, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I judged a man's worth by his boots, and in doing so, revealed how little I understood about true value." The crowd included many familiar faces from the previous year, including several veterans who had become regular collaborators in Sterling Tech's new initiatives. But most notably, in the front row sat Clint Eastwood wearing those same legendary boots. "These shoes I'm wearing," Marcus continued, glancing down at his feet, "they've walked through veteran hospitals, construction sites, and rehabilitation centers. Every scuff and scratch represents a lesson learned, a life touched, a moment of real purpose, and I wouldn't trade these marks for all the designer shoes in the world." He gestured to a large screen behind him, where images began to appear. Sterling Tech's new veteran employment program, the VR rehabilitation centers, the coding workshops for disabled veterans. "These aren't just corporate initiatives," he explained. "They're promises kept, lessons learned, and lives changed." "But the real story isn't about me or my company," Marcus added, his voice softening. "It's about understanding that true legacy isn't built on what we own or what we wear. It's built on what we do for others, how we serve, how we give back." The tech billionaire's transformation had sparked a movement in Silicon Valley. Companies that had once competed over market share and stock prices were now measuring success by their social impact. The term Sterling Standard had emerged, referring to technology companies that prioritize genuine service alongside innovation. "Mr. Eastwood," Marcus said, turning to face the legend, "your boots taught me that every mark, every scratch, every sign of wear should tell a story of service. They showed me that true worth isn't in maintaining a perfect appearance, but in earning honest marks of purpose." The veteran support programs initiated by Sterling Tech had already helped thousands, with real measurable impacts on lives and communities. But more importantly, they had changed the conversation about success and value in the tech industry. "Looking back," Marcus reflected, "I realized that those boots weren't just footwear. They were a testament to a life lived in service of others. They were a challenge to all of us to measure our worth, not by what we wear, but by what we do." The room sat in respectful silence as Marcus concluded his speech. "Today I stand before you not as a tech billionaire trying to impress, but as someone still learning what it means to create real value in the world. These shoes of mine still have many miles to walk, many stories to earn, many lives to touch." As he stepped down from the podium, the applause wasn't the polite, restrained kind typical of such events. It was genuine, heartfelt, a recognition of authentic transformation and meaningful change. Eastwood met him at the bottom of the steps, those famous boots as worn and honest as ever. The two men shared a moment of understanding, mentor and student, legend and learner, each wearing shoes that told true stories of service and purpose. The legacy of that night, of those boots, and of that lesson continued to grow. It wasn't just about footwear anymore. It was about understanding that true worth comes from what you give, not what you own. It was about recognizing that the most valuable things in life often bear the marks of the journey that made them worthwhile. As the evening drew to a close, Marcus looked around the room and saw not a gathering of Hollywood elite and tech billionaires, but a community of people who understood that real success is measured in lives touched, in service rendered, in genuine impact made. The story of the boots and the billionaire had become more than just a tale of humility and transformation. It had become a catalyst for genuine change, a reminder that true value isn't found in the shine of new things, but in the honest marks of purpose and service.